Intense persecution. We should accept the reality that there will be times when believers face intense persecution. Here's Gene.
When we look at biblical history, when we look at New Testament history, when we look at church history, beyond what we see in the Bible, there are periods of time when there is intense persecution. Now, thankfully, it hasn't happened persistently. And most of us have lived in a period of time where we're free from persecution, which raises a very interesting question, a very convicting question in some respects. When persecuted, why do some of God's people live and some die? Wow. Think about that. Well, we have an illustration right here in Jeremiah. We read about an indictment on Jeremiah. He's seized. In Jeremiah 26:10, when the officials of Judah heard these things. Now, let me just explain for a moment. The officials of Judah were the elders of Israel. They were the heads of households. They were judges. They were men particularly who were assigned to lead the whole nation. So we read, when these men, the officials of Judah, heard these things, what things? The things that Jeremiah was saying about the coming of judgment on Jerusalem. That's the context. What happened? Well, these officials went from the king's palace to the Lord's temple and sat at the entrance of the new gate. They made observations. And here's what they discovered. Then the priests and the prophets said to the officials and all the people. Now, again, keep in mind who the officials were. But at this point, there's another group. It's the religious leaders, the religious people who are assigned particularly to lead God's people in the right way. They're the priests and the prophets. And so we read, the priests and the prophets said to the officials and all the people, this man deserves the death sentence. Jeremiah deserves to be killed because of what he's saying. Because he has prophesied against this city as you have heard with your own ears. Now notice the result of the evaluation. Jeremiah is released. Then the officials and all the people told the priests and the prophets, who, by the way, I believe were condemning Jeremiah because they were jealous. He was saying things that was the opposite of their lies and their deceit. But here's what the officials said. This man doesn't deserve the death sentence, for he has spoken to us in the name of Yahweh our God. Now that's interesting because all of these people basically were worshiping false gods, but still they incorporated God, Yahweh, into their theological system. They hadn't departed totally from that. And so they said, he at least is referring to Yahweh, our God. So they released Jeremiah. But notice what happened. We have another prophet, same time period, the prophet Uriah. Another man was also prophesying in the name of Yahweh. In other words, just like Jeremiah. His name was Uriah, son of Shemaiah, from Kiriath Jearim, which is about 9 miles from Jerusalem. Remember, Jeremiah lived about 3 miles from Jerusalem. And he's prophesying the same thing that Jeremiah said. Judgment's coming on Jerusalem. He prophesied against this city and against this land in words like all those of Jeremiah. They had an identical message, basically. What happened? They brought Uriah out of Egypt. Now, that simply means that when he was under persecution, he fled to Egypt. They were so evil, they went after him, they brought him back. They brought Uriah out of Egypt, took him to King Jehoiakim, who, by the way, was a very evil king, who executed him with the sword and threw his corpse into the burial place of the common people. But Ahikam, son of Shaphan, supported Jeremiah. Bless his heart. That took courage. So Jeremiah, was not handed over to the people to be put to death. Now here's the question. It's more specific than the earlier question. Why did Jeremiah live and Uriah die? Well, let me take you to a New Testament story. James and John, brothers, sons of Zebedee, apostles. In the early history of the church, we read in Acts chapter 12 about James' martyrdom. About that time, King Herod, and by the way, he was a wicked guy, paranoid, evil, horrible. About that time, King Herod cruelly attacked some who belonged to the church, and he killed James, John's brother, with the sword. Question: why did John live and James die? The fact of the matter is, we don't have an answer to that question except our times are in God's hands. And some of these questions we won't know until eternity. Paul didn't really understand that completely, except notice his commitment, his divine perspective when he was in prison. This was his first imprisonment, by the way. My eager expectation and hope is that I will not be ashamed about anything, but that now, as always, with all boldness, Christ will be highly honored in my body, whether by life or by death. Now, the fact is, at that moment, Paul didn't know whether he was going to live or die. But he said, whether I live or die, I want to glorify God. If I die, I'll be better off because I'll be with the Lord. But if I live, it's better for you that I stay here and minister to you. Well, he was released for a period of time, and he was able to minister, but then he was recaptured. This time he was put in a horrible dungeon, which led to his death. The last letter he ever wrote was 2 Timothy, where he referred to the fact that he'd finished the race, the course, and he knew he was going home. Now, that leads to a practical question, and that is, and I asked myself this. What are your thoughts and feelings when you reflect on the fact that you personally could face this kind of persecution? And to be very honest, I just had to say, Lord, it scares me. That's frightful. That's fearful. I think Paul faced the fear, but he was able to trust God in the middle of that, regardless of what was going to happen. And we have these incredible stories of people who faced death for the cause of Christ with a sense of peace, like Tyndale, who was burned at the stake because he translated the Bible into English, and his final prayer was, Lord, open the eyes of the King of England, Henry VIII. He died that we might have the Bible in our own language. And he went to that death with incredible confidence in the Lord. I can only say, Lord, if I ever face that, just help me to be faithful. We don't know why. Some people live and some people die. Why not us? Right now, when there are Christians in other parts of the world who are giving their life because they're Christians. I can't answer that question except God is a sovereign God, and I can only trust Him that should we face that, we'll have the same grace as men like James, men like Paul, men like Tyndale, men like all those men and women who've gone before us and have experienced God's wonderful grace.